It has been almost 13 months since we as a people walked free from Egypt beneath the screen of ethereal mist, led by flame and fed on the bread of heaven. We have sweated together to assemble a temple and transform ourselves from a cluster of slaves into a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And now that the Mishkan has seen a month of operation, God reaches out to Moshe with an instruction to tally the people. Su'u et Rosh Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael, count the heads of the entire congregation, Kol Yotzei Tzava, all who go out to war. And though the rest of this morning's reading catalogues an inventory of numbers and names and tribal formations and culminates with the mandate for the Levium to pack and carry the dismantled tabernacle, this is not the first time that God has commissioned a national census. First, when we were freed from Pharaoh, we were counted. And then when we fell with the Egel, we were counted. And now at the edge of the desert, we are counted again. God seems to suffer from a chronic need to know our number, as Rashi famously says, mitoch chibatan lefanav, out of a deep affection. Mona otam kol sha'ah, God counted us recurrently. But this is my question. Why now, when insisting that Moshe complete a new poll, does God limit the pool? Why does he order a count of the entire congregation, but then confine the count to Kol Yotzei Tzava, those who go out to war? Why now, still in the middle of the Sinai, still led and fed and protected by heaven, does God want to know the number of soldiers that his chosen people boasts? And the most obvious answer to this question is given by a man who was both a mystic and a commentator who fled Spain in the wake of a regrettably successful disputation, Nachmanides. And he says that those of us who know how this book ends often forget that the people at this moment, at the beginning of Bamidbar, were on the threshold of conquest. In his words, Ata hayu muzumanim likanes ba'aretz, right now, they were primed and prepped to enter the land, which meant one thing. They needed to be ready for war. It is true that in the Midbar they would be sheltered from the sun and shielded from assault, but to inaugurate the administrative autonomy, to create their own nation state, they would need to fight with their own muscle and triumph by their own might. To govern themselves and to hold themselves as a beacon of what it means to be a free people under God, they would need to win their own wars. To be the paradigmatic people, the model nation in a world of dictators, they would need to get in the trenches, defend their interests and defeat their own enemies. In the words of the 19th century Italian commentator Shadal, Shlo yinirin ka'avadim habarachim, they could no longer look like a band of slaves making their escape. Leka'am aruch milchama, but needed to appear like a people fit for war. So for Nachmanides, it was precisely now that they needed to know not only the size of their army and how many could fight, but that it would not suffice to be simply a nation of priests. They needed to become a legion of soldiers. So Moshe was called on to count Kol Yotzei Tzava, all who go to war. But there is a less literally bellicose reading of this moment, one that sees the census as a conscription into a very different sort of army. In the words of a different mystic, not from Catalonia but from Hadrianopolis, this tally was intended to mobilize our ancestors for something other than an encounter with their adversaries. In the words of Rav Moshe Alshech, Yesh shnei minei tzava, there are two kinds of army. Yesh tzava lemilchama, there is an army for war. V'yesh tzava lahashrat shechina, and an army for absorbing the divine presence. Just as it takes a battalion to conquer an enemy, it takes a company to countenance divinity. Just as geopolitical antagonists can resist an army's advance, our material condition both impedes theophany and supplants our capacity to manifest heaven. For the Alshech, it takes a team of people to invest this terrestrial plane with a celestial presence. And it is right now, at this moment, in the shadow of the Mishkan, that we are summoned not only to shoulder a structure, but to assume the spirit for which it was built. In his words, Ata Na'asim Yisrael Tzavah Shechina. It is at this moment that we become a national platform for divinity. Hence, Moshe is ordered to count those whose age makes them a suitable stage for God's presence, Kol Yotzei Tzavah, all who can gather into an army. But if we move from the world of Middle Eastern mystics to the time of Germanic romantics, we find Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch taking a very different tack. For him, it is neither for military enlistment or spiritual conscription that we are being tallied. There is something other than combat and theophany that requires mass mobilization, and that is communal life. In his words, we do not need to see the census as commissioned for the purpose of military service. Kol Yotzei Tzavah can equally mean any person called on in a time of need. Letzeit mechayav hapratiim, to depart private life. Leitgayes la'avodat hatzibur, to enlist and mobilize for the sake of public service. For of Hirsch, this tally is less for Sheirut Milchama than for Sheirut Le'umi, for as hard as it is to win a war or bear the force of heaven, the chores of a flourishing communal life rely on a core of deeply devoted public servants. In 1960 at 2 a.m., after a hard day of campaigning in Ann Arbor, JFK got up to give an impromptu speech to the students of the University of Michigan, and in that speech, he launched the idea of the American Peace Corps. In response to a Soviet program to send men and women across the globe in service of world communism, he saw a need to deploy men and women in service to the principles of democracy and liberty and peace. He saw the need not only for military service, but public service. And it is this moment in our history, at the edge of the desert for Rav Hirsch, that God teaches Moshe of this vital need. But there is one final reading of the census and its focus on Kol Yotzei Tzavah that I'd like to share with you this morning, one that takes us back to the world of medieval Middle Eastern mystics and the words of the Aleppo-based Rav Mordechai Cohen. And for him, Moshe is summoned to count the entire congregation not as a means to ensure military readiness or as a method to manifest heaven's presence or as a scheme to succeed peacefully as a people. It was a tally to attune every soul to a battle that we all face, the war within. In his words, Kol tzarich latzeit, we all need to go out, le'lachem im hayetzer, to fight against our impulses. We all need to muster our better angels to fight our worst inclinations. We are all warriors in a perpetual war to do good and be good and steer clear of temptation. We are all, in an elemental sense, Yotzei Tzavah, those who go out to war. So it is on the basis of these three words, Kol Yotzei Tzavah, that we see four exegetes passing the complexity of our condition, showing how life can be a battle on so many fronts, a battle for physical safety, for spiritual meaning, for communal prosperity, for moral integrity. And we as a people are called on to mobilize to secure all these things for us and for others. We are not only to strive to be a kingdom of priests, but to rise up as a legion of warriors in a war against hostility, futility, apathy, and iniquity. And we are all blessed to be heirs of a rich history filled with heroes who have fought for all these things and summon us to do the same. May we all win the wars that we face each day, battling to secure a better world for tomorrow. Shavua Tov.